Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome to your screen your NASCIO President, Dennis Goulet.
Welcome to Day 3 of the 2020 NASCIO Annual Conference. I hope you've been able to join live sessions as well as engage with your colleagues in the Hub. All sessions from Monday and Tuesday are available in the Hub on demand and will remain so through October 31st. Today's theme is cybersecurity and privacy. Cybersecurity has ranked #1 on the CIO Top 10 Priorities list NASCIO conducts for the past 7 years. This year has magnified the importance of cybersecurity in everything we do. Government workforces moved to a work-from-home model. Social unrest led to a resurgence of hacktivism. And as an election year, we saw increased threats from foreign actors. It was fitting that the biennial Deloitte NASCIO Cybersecurity Survey was scheduled to be conducted this year. This survey studies state chief information security officers to better understand the current climate in state governments and offer recommendations based on success stories. Before we begin the panel discussion highlighting key findings of this year's study, we'd like to recognize a specific state chief information security officer. In 2013, NASCIO began the Thomas M. Barrett Cybersecurity Scholarship. The honor is named for the late Thomas Jarrett, former CIO for Delaware and past NASCIO president who had a passion for cybersecurity. The scholarship awarded outstanding state chief information security officers with a scholarship to attend the NASCIO conference. The intent was to expose CISOs to the larger IT community and to have them share their expertise with the CIO audience. As cybersecurity has become an ever-present topic, and as the CISO community has become an integral part of NASCIO, this honor evolved from a scholarship to an award for outstanding leadership and accomplishments. I'm pleased to announce the recipient of the newly created Thomas M. Jarrett State Cybersecurity Leadership Award is Phil Bates, CISO for the state of Utah. Phil was nominated by the Utah CIO, Mike Hussey, and has served as the CISO for the state of Utah since 2015. During his tenure, he has implemented many programs and initiatives aimed at improving Utah's cybersecurity posture. Most notably, in 2016, Phil pushed to create the Utah Cyber Center, which consolidated state, federal, and local resources into a single location, significantly improving coordination between all of these groups. The Utah Cyber Center has played an important role in helping Utah cities and counties respond to several recent ransomware attacks. Congratulations to Phil Bates for his receipt of this award, and thank you for your contributions to the larger state IT community through your involvement with NASCIO. Now, I'd like to introduce the panel for the Deloitte NASCIO Cybersecurity Study. Meredith Ward, NASCIO Director of Policy and Research, will moderate. She is joined by Maria Thompson, State Risk Officer for North Carolina, Debbie Blythe, CISO for the state of Colorado, and Srini Subramanian with Deloitte. Please enjoy the session.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, NASCIO. Of course, we wish that we were seeing you in person, but we'll still be delivering some good data to you this morning. Next slide, please. So today on our agenda, welcome and introductions. That's what we're doing right now. We'll give you some information about the history of the report, and then we'll really dig into the results and the key themes, and then have some closing comments. Next slide. And next slide. All right, so we're now in year 10 of the Deloitte NASCIO Cybersecurity Study, and I couldn't be prouder with the progress that we've made from the very first study where not every state even had a CISO to 2020, where I'll say this several times, but 51 responses, all 50 states and 1 territory. Srini, any look back or fond memories on the timeline here?
Thank you, Meredith. Yeah, you were right about the 10 years journey. So we started really in 2010 and the sixth report. And the most important thing about this report is extensive set of questions and the CISOs responding in all of the states responding in spite of their preoccupation with responding to the pandemic. So I think it's a phenomenal commitment that the CISOs have demonstrated to the study and how the study helps them. So back to you, Meredith.
And just so everyone knows, the CISOs answered these questions in May and June. They certainly had a lot on their plates, even as we learned yesterday from the CIO survey. States really had to scale up. They had to respond to the pandemic, and CISOs were such an integral part to that. So we really appreciate all of their responses. Steve, next slide, please. All right, so today with our wonderful panelists, this is going to be the meat of what we're going to be talking about. So this year, from the results, we came up with 3 kind of key takeaways that the data spoke to us. Obviously, COVID-19 is number 1 there. While COVID-19 has taken over our lives, CISOs certainly have other things going on this year, but the COVID pandemic really did color everything about 2020 and continues to do so. Another key theme, and this is something that we've talked about extensively at NASCIO, is really connecting the dots, state and local higher ed collaboration, especially with last year being the year of ransomware, if you will. I know that collaboration has increased a lot between state and locals. And then strength, consistency, enforcement, and numbers. This is about a centralized cybersecurity governance model. We'll talk a little bit about that next. So Steve, next slide, and one more. All right, so Srini, dig a little bit into the data, and then Maria and Debbie, we're going to ask you kind of for your color commentary. Do you agree with this? Is this what you said? Things like that. But Srini, let's take a look at the data.
Sounds good. Thank you, Meredith. Meredith talked about how the CISOs responded to 61 questions. So we are only bringing a few of the data points here. But again, the CISOs responded to 61 questions, not straightforward, some of them multi-part and so forth. So again, thank you very much for doing that. Now, when we look at the pandemic and how it amplified the gaps in cybersecurity, the first thing to do is to congratulate the Chief Information Security Officers and the CIOs for the exemplary job that they were able to do. In spite of all the resource constraints, the states moved to a work from home paradigm overnight, almost immediately. And with all this resource constraints, the CISOs were able to accomplish that with almost minor glitches here and there. Now, when you look at the data related to that, so we had very specific questions about COVID. Look at the data related to that. More than 52% of the states had less than 5% of the workforce working from home pre-COVID. And if you look at the right side of the graph at the bottom of the screen, now post-COVID, 35 of the states have still more than 50% of their workforce working remotely. Now, just imagine the kind of complete shift in the dynamics. Now, most states have 30, 40,000 employees on an average, and all of them moving to a work from home model. And then we asked the question about what kind of safeguards that the CISOs had to take. And if you look at the right-hand side of the chart, you're looking at the collaboration tools, like safeguarding, putting security on the teleconferencing and video solutions, and the collaboration mechanisms for the workers, establishing secure remote connections, multi-factor authentication, a huge deal, and providing awareness and education, because there were phishing schemes and other things that just popped up as quickly as the work from home had to happen. If you can go to the next slide, please. And a couple of data points in terms of the continuing challenges. Now, we have seen this since 2010. The top 2 challenges haven't changed a bit. Lack of sufficient cybersecurity budget continued to be the top challenge in 2020 survey as well, and followed by inadequate availability of cybersecurity staffing. Now, a new entrant to the third top spot is the legacy infrastructure and solutions. And we sort of kind of think that it's also because of the gaps that COVID amplified with the legacy infrastructure either to be able to scale to the surge in demand for citizen services, or to be able to provide adequate level of security protections. And I will just talk about two call to actions and then turn it right back to the panel. So one is the legacy infrastructure and the tech modernization agenda. Can the CISOs co-sponsor this with the CIOs and the CTOs to really take this, the technology infrastructure of the state to the modern era? And the second is, yesterday we saw this in the CIO panel, the workforce is not going back to what it was before, right? The state workforce is going to continue to have certain percentage of people working remotely. And one CISO remarked that, that they had to provide secure access to thousands of workers in unemployment compensation and in contact tracing that have never been state workers before, that would never set foot in a state facility, and yet they need to use state systems, and they need to be provided access, educated on the cyber awareness, and so forth. So some pretty big challenges, and the call to action is on tech modernization and really adapting to the future of workforce. Back to you, Meredith.
You know, and one thing that I'll add for this year, we asked CISOs for some open-ended comments. So these three key themes that we're going to go through, these are straight from the mouths of CISOs. Now, we're not going to tell you who said what, but obviously this was what they said to us. There are some very key themes or some common themes in there, and that's where our information kind of comes from. Maria, in North Carolina, talk a little bit about your experience with COVID-19, scaling up, securing, and some of these things that we've been talking about.
Able to unmute. There I am. Okay. Perfect. So thank you, Meredith. Definitely this list here speaks to what we had to deal with within North Carolina. When COVID hit, you know, just like all my peers, we all had to rush to figure out what are we going to do? How are we going to manage the endpoints? Srini mentioned, you know, the contact tracers. These are folks that we've never anticipated would be part of our infrastructure. And so we really had to take an endpoint centric view of our environment. Gone are the days when we are factoring in just the defense in depth as far as the regular infrastructure. So finding out how can we make sure that we have visibility into these endpoints, you know, who's connecting. In some cases, if they're administrators of you know, critical systems, ensuring that we have MFA on VPN connections for them. You know, there's a whole lot of things that we had to focus on. But, you know, we talked about educating, and I think that was one of the key things that we found ourselves trying to do more so than we have done before is how can we get every person who's not used to using the Web 2.0 solutions out there, teleconferencing, and making sure that they are using the standard approved methods and not just, hey, I like this one-off tool that I've been dealing with, you know, that I use for my family. Let's just spin up a call and getting them to understand why. Why is it that we want them to use this particular solution over this other solution? So we found ourselves being more educators, not just on, you know, maybe the cyber awareness principles, but also how to technically use certain solutions, you know, that are approved and establishing policies around them. So these are some of the things that we have to deal with within North Carolina.
Yeah, enterprise architecture is life, right? So Debbie, talk a little bit about your experiences in Colorado.
Yeah, so in Colorado, we had to scale up our VPN infrastructure from 10,000 concurrent sessions to 30,000 concurrent sessions. We did that over a weekend. I was really impressed with our network team. But then we had to provision a whole bunch of VPN accounts, thousands that obviously were not in place. We also had to order and deploy thousands of laptops because we kind of went with the posture of you can't connect to VPN unless you have a state issued laptop. And one of the things I was just thinking about when I think about legacy infrastructure, a lot of us think about mainframe or we think about old Windows servers, but I also was thinking about the fact that you had to connect to our VPN in order to get patches, for instance, because you know, our legacy way of doing things was everybody was in the office, and so patches were pushed out automatically over the office network. So, you know, trying to figure out how to update the infrastructure to ensure that we could get patches in a remote environment as well. And we created a tech kit and a lot of cybersecurity guidance on how to educate employees, as Maria said, things like how to make your home network secure. And if you are going to use those web conferencing tools that aren't our standard, here are some configuration guidelines on how to use those. So it was a whole lot of activity that it was not in our plans anywhere, but it was a good opportunity to be able to do a lot more education on how to be a more secure citizen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys. So Steve, next slide. Let's talk a little bit about this second key theme. And again, as I said, you know, this is something, a concept, if you will, that got a lot of attention last year in 2019. I would say that before in 2019, in fact, I know this, that some CISOs would say, you know, we didn't really even know a lot of our local peers. You know, I think that the asks of state CISOs, you know, you guys have full-time jobs, and then, you know, also reaching out to local governments and higher ed, it adds a lot. But I do know that, you know, the CISOs that I've talked to, they say that, you know, partnering with local governments really improves their state cybersecurity posture. And I think, you know, you guys would agree with that as well. So Srini, a little bit about this data. The one thing that did jump out at me, you know, CISOs, however, are not very confident, not that confident in the cybersecurity practices of local government. So I know a lot of CISOs see this as a challenge. What else does this data say to you, Srini?
Sure, Meredith. So the data is talking about the confidence level of the CISO. So granted, we did the survey with the state level chief information security officers. We did not really poll the local governments and the city governments. And the one thing that we all know is the effectiveness or the consistency of cyber posture among local governments is quite weighted, because there are large cities that may have better cyber posture than really small counties and cities. And when we look at the data, so 56% of the CISOs are not very confident in the cyber posture, and 35% of them say that they're only somewhat confident. But then when we also looked at some of the cyber services that the states can possibly extend to local governments. Now, granted, states have their own challenges that we talked about just now in the previous key theme, but still there are some cyber services that states could possibly extend to the local government workers. And when we looked at it, only about 28% of the state CISOs had extensively collaborated with the local governments, and 65% of them talking about very limited collaboration. If you can go to the next slide, please. And when we looked at what could be the potential top services, take, for instance, awareness and training, right? Like today, this is one of the more mature areas that the state CISOs have done extensive work in the past 10 years. And most of the state workers go through extensive awareness and training programs. And how about extending this to the local governments and services like that, and incident management, which appears as one of the top ones? How about taking some of these offerings and enterprise services and making them available to the local governments? Granted, the autonomy of the local governments and how the jurisdictions and how the governance of it works might come in the way. But is cyber a cause that the state CISOs can transcend these boundaries of government governance and really look at all of cyber, or cyber within all of state borders as one entity, particularly in light of how the federal government is also looking at potentially funding the state programs? Meredith, you mentioned about potential challenges in local government. Last 2 years, we saw an exponential increase in ransomware attacks, and how some of the local governments had to resort to paying the ransom, and the ransom payment increased dramatically too in the last 2 years. So just one example of areas of challenges that is getting a lot of attention, and particularly if the federal government is going to be funding initiatives in cyber for all of cyber within a state border, what would be the impediments in CISOs being able to take a stance to that effect?
So, you know, something that all CISOs have heard me say before is that, you know, I have heard that, you know, we can't really assist local governments because it's not in our swim lane, we don't have the funding. And I want to challenge you, if you have that, have that misconception, and I'll just call it out, I think what it is, you know, it doesn't take any money to pick up the phone to know who these folks are. You know, I'm sure Maria will talk a little bit. She's really connected with a local kind of municipal organization. It's an easy way to kind of get in touch with local governments, but really explore how you can build relationships with these folks, maybe without stepping on territory, because that's something that we do hear from local governments as well. Debbie, I know that you have had interaction with local governments. You've created a couple of programs. Talk a little bit about that in Colorado.
Yeah, so in Colorado, I feel like we're a little bit behind some of the other states, but recently we've had a local government group who came together and created what they called a 10-year plan, kind of envisioning what they would like cybersecurity to look like 10 years in the future across the state. And so we have, from a state perspective, kind of come alongside them and become part of that team and created, you know, basically adopted that as what we're calling a whole of state plan. And we are trying to put together a committee who would be able to help with some of the legislative changes, because, you know, we recognize we don't have any authority from a state government perspective over local government cybersecurity. So we may need some statutory changes. We're also looking at, there's not really any funding because, you know, as you'll talk about in a couple of slides, while Colorado have a dedicated funding stream, it's billed back to all of the executive branch agencies. So there's not really a way for us to spend money on local governments or to recoup money that we spend on local governments. So we'll put some thought into that as well. But we certainly have looked at other governments or other state governments and services that they're providing to local governments. And we think it's a fantastic opportunity and a fantastic model that we want to replicate in Colorado.
Maria, we talked about this, I think at NASCIO mid-year, state and local collaboration. You and Randy, who's a local CIO in North Carolina, talk to them about what North Carolina has done.
Yes, thanks, Meredith. So in North Carolina, we've established a relationship utilizing a local organization called NCLGISA, North Carolina Local Government Information Systems Association. And they have, you know, mid-year conferences, annual conferences, and we use that as the platform to actually engage with the local community to say, we are here as a resource. This is what we bring, you know, we bring to bear whenever you have any kind of issue. We've also had, you know, sessions with them about our procurement. Hey, these are the contracts that you are able to leverage. And I think over time and seeing us in front of them, and also with us assisting them with cyber incidents that they've had in the past 2 years, you know, they've looked at us as not a big brother, but more as a partner. And we've formed, you know, through those relationships, we've continued to build. We've added them to our statewide cyber disruption plan because they have the NCLGISA team, they have this unique group of security and IT professionals called the IT Strike Team. And this is an organization that's been in place for years and is part of the emergency operations plan where they would assist. This was a team of individuals that would assist another local government entity that was impacted, whether it was a natural disaster or anything else. And so cyber was just another you know, piece of the puzzle that they could support in. And they have literally been a very close partner with the state. So when an incident occurs within a local government, whether it's a school or, you know, a municipal, whatever it is, that a public sector organization that's impacted, we pick up the bat phone, and it's my organization, DIT, it's our National Guard Cyber Response Force, it's the NCLGISA IT Strike Team, it's our federal partners, And through that relationship, we are able to connect with whoever that impacted party is and assist them with boots on the ground for forensics. You have in that list 1 through 5. Investigations and forensics, one of the key things that we bring to bear. So that reduces the cost of the local government having to rely on trying to find resources. And we're also a trusted entity of them. So over time, in the last 2 years, especially, last year I think we had 11 reported ransomware incidents. This year we've had 13, not counting the third-party vendor that was recently impacted and impacts a lot of the states, or impacted a lot of the states. But we've had all of these, and we have supported them through every single one of them. So, again, being out in front with them, lockstep with them, shows that we are a partner. And similar to Debbie, we do have funding constraints. We do. We have that our IT organization is receipts-based, so we have to be fiscally responsible as far as the funding that we can put and bring to bear. But we are having these discussions within our organization to see how can we do more, and even from a receipts-based organization, how can we provide services that may be cost-effective for local government? Because that is also a concern that we hear, is that what we're charging our state agencies may not be something that a local government can afford, because we have small, tier 1 counties that are they're strapped for funding. And so we have to figure out what that tiered model of support and services could be, but making sure that we provide them with a secure service that will protect them in the long run and not, set them up for failure.
Maria, I love what you're talking about. And, most states are a chargeback model. So I don't know if CISOs ever thought when they became CISOs that be creative would be a top spot on their job description. But, I know you all definitely are, and you've looked at creative ways. And one message, if we have any local folks joining us, I think that it's pretty obvious whether a state would want to or not, they don't have the time and resources to take over. So remember that an offer of assistance is not we want to take over. So a relationship can be built kind of both ways there. So let's take a look at the third key takeaway, and this is about Steve, if you'll change the slide. All right. So when we say strength, consistency, and enforcement in numbers, this is really talking about that centralized cybersecurity model. And as we talked about this a little bit in the COVID section of the report, and we also talked about this in the CIO survey, that states who had a centralized model, it really helped them respond to COVID, and it made things a little bit easier. So Srini, kind of break down, I know Deloitte has definitions that they use for federated, centralized, and decentralized. Touch on that real quick, and then let's talk about the data on this slide.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. So this is, when we looked at the data related to how state cyber functions are organized, 50% of the states still are in the federated model, which means there is a central CISO who is at the enterprise level, and then there are agency level resources that have dotted relationship, but they are really attached to the agencies. Now, about 10% of the states still are in a decentralized model, and 40% of the states are in centralized governance model. Now, when we look at the privacy function, aside data, 18 states have a privacy officer. Only 18 of the states have a privacy officer, and they are in a very predominantly decentralized/federated model as well. When we ask the CISOs, what do you think is the most effective way for you to be able to governance? The CISOs came predominantly and said, like 38 of the states said centralized is the preferred way to go, because we want to get over some of the challenges that we have in transcending our working across agencies for cyber. Steve, if you can go to the next slide. Now, what are some of the advantages of the centralized model? Really boils down to agility, effectiveness, and efficiencies. Because state, at the end of the day, is at the enterprise level, it's only as vulnerable as the weakest link. And if one agency is not equipped to deal with all of the cyber challenges, all of the agencies are going to be impacted. And the centralized model will also help increased adoption of cybersecurity services across the state. and a few other things like workforce continues to be a challenge. And why not have a centralized model to be able to pull all the workforces and potentially even cross-train and get them ready for cyber, to be effective cyber workforce. Steve, if you can go to the next slide, please. And then we looked at the number of FTEs. So this has been one of the things that we have tracked since 2010. And if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, huge improvement from where things were in 2010, right? Like most of the states had between 1 to 5 and 6 to 15 FTEs at an enterprise level. And today the average is more towards 16 to 25 and 26 to 50. So that's a good improvement. But this year, for the first time, we also asked the CISOs about the resources at the agency level. So if you look at just one data point, 44% of the states would have more than 51 full-time cyber employees if they move to a centralized model compared to the decentralized or federated model. So definitely a way that more resources can be pulled, more effectively deployed, and more opportunities for elevating cyber. With one caveat that we need to be aware of, which is if all the resources are pulled centrally, would they have the proximity to the business and the programs at the agencies where it is deployed at? So back to you, Meredith.
And the thing I'll say about this has definitely been an evolution over the 10 years that we've done this study, and certainly just in my time, my 7 years at NASCIO, we've seen a slow march, if you will, to a more centralized model, not only in cybersecurity, but also for the CIO organization, just kind of in general. So Debbie or Maria, do you want to comment on this? Do you want to talk about what kind of model you have or what kind of model you'd like to have? I'll throw it out to whoever wants to go first.
I'll start. So we are a centralized model, and it was probably around 2013, let's say, that all of the agency ISOs, information security officers, joined the Office of Information Security, and these were sort of organized according to their strengths and interests to create the bigger Office of Information Security organizations. So certainly it helped make our organization bigger, but I do agree with Srini that one of the concerns of the business is, have you lost that business perspective? And so we still look for ways where we can have some dedicated focus on specific agencies. So we have specific security analysts who are focused on specific agencies, and we're trying to do more risk reporting that is very agency specific, and also trying to start up some risk committees within each agency to really focus on and drill down into risks per agency. So that's something we're really trying to bridge that gap right now, because I think we've done a good job creating a centralized organization, but we've recognized the need to have a little bit more agency focus as well.
And for North Carolina, I would say we're in a hybrid state. We have attempted consolidation of executive branch agencies pre-Maria. And we've been successful in some, aspects of it. We're in the journey right now of the larger agencies, our transportation, public safety, health and human services. So we're still in the hybrid, but I'm going to say something controversial, because a lot of times we focus on the executive branch agencies and consolidation of the executive branch agencies. And when I think of my role as the state CISO, which is one of the reasons why we adopted the whole of state approach, it can't be separated by, the branches that, the legislative, the judicial. I feel as though we're missing something when we're not consolidating all of those from a security perspective, purely from a security perspective. Because as we all know, the bad guys don't care what service, what branch do you belong to. In fact, they relish the fact that we have these separations so that they can take advantage of the situation, knowing all too well that we are connected somewhere down the line. Again, that's one of the primary drivers for why I looked to adopt a whole of state approach to cybersecurity, to try to see where we could bring those pieces together. And yes, we can do them without necessarily consolidating the personnel, but somehow the infrastructure has to be cohesive. We have to interoperate so that we can get a full picture across the board. And the other point that I'd like to make is, no matter, we will always be under-resourced within state government. And so when we look at how we can consolidate personnel, I think we should also look at, and some of you may be familiar with this term, is building the security in. And by what I mean by that is looking across the IT divisions that you have, the services that are being provided, and having those evangelists, identifying who those evangelists are within that organization, and turning them, making them a double agent, if you will, but in a good sense, in that they are focused on security. We've all been in those meetings where you have that person that's always, hey, but what about this? And you go, this person is a good asset that we can use proactively to get security built into any service system that will always be thinking and putting security on the forefront of their minds. So figuring out how we can do that, understanding that even if we have 51 full-time employees, that may never be enough, because cyber and the different services that are being developed and deployed, it's not stopping. And especially in this pandemic, where we know we're not going to go back to where we were before, and there's going to be a heavier reliance on a lot of IT services to provide us, with what we need in order to be proactive working in our home life and our work life, working from home. So again, something else that I think that we should consider as CISOs is how we can build people in and not necessarily just focus on those people that are designated as security, because it's never enough.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We call those security champions rather than double agents, but I might have to change it. I might get more. But I totally agree. I mean, regardless of where you fall on this chart, however many security people you have, it's never going to be enough. This is not a job for security people. This is a job that takes all of us. So we need security champions across all of the infrastructure organization and across the business too.
That's right. Cybersecurity absolutely is a team sport. Steve, if we can go to the next slide. And we'll keep on going, one more. So in 2018 version of the survey, we issued some bold plays for state CISOs. And so Srini, you and I will go through these, all three of them, and then Maria, Debbie, when we go through all three of them at the end, you guys think about if you have any comments. But again, you can see what our bold plays were here. Ask for dedicated cyber program funding. CISOs is an enabler of innovation, not a barrier. And once again, team with the private sector and higher education. Steve, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we will talk a lot about, or we have talked a lot about funding. And, NASCIO is a big supporter of a lot of bills that are in Congress right now that would provide a dedicated cybersecurity grant program to states. I said to somebody yesterday, had you asked me 8 years ago if this would happen, I would say absolutely not. Now I will tell you that I do think that I see some progress, and then it's probably a little bit more likely. As we said, cybersecurity is a team sport, and we need kind of all hands on deck. So Srini, let's go through the data for the bold plays, and I will just kind of interject when I want to.
Sounds good, Meredith. So the first one is about dedicated cyber program funding. And we saw this in this study that only 36% of the states have a dedicated cybersecurity budget. But the good thing is about 57% of them said that that they have the overall cyber budget that they are receiving as part of the IT budget is seeing an increase. Now, when we looked at the overall cybersecurity funding as a percentage of technology funding, most of the states are still in the 1 to 3% of the overall technology funding spend. Now, when we contrast that with the publicly available data for the federal agencies, these are non-defense agencies. So we are talking only about federal civilian agencies. Their spend is about 16.3% of the overall technology budget. And then when we compare it to the financial institutions, well, we typically go to the financial services industry because the banks and the people that dealt with money were the ones that really could be a potential comparison or benchmark for cyber. And even across the board, they spend more than 10% of their technology budget on cyber. If you can go to the next slide, Steve. On to the bold play number 2, where we talked about a lot of in 2018 about CISOs being enabler of innovation and not barriers. And in this particular case, you can go to the next slide, Steve. Okay, so I will just talk about the enabler of innovation. When we compared with the state, the federal or financial services industry, CISOs, their top priorities today are really in the area of emerging technologies. Cloud, robotic process automation, and digital technologies is where they are investing cyber funds so that they can be much closer to the business. The state CISOs are still looking at the blocking and tackling of cyber assessment, cyber awareness, and those kind of things. And the third bold play, which deals with the teaming with the private sector, there is some positive progress in terms of outsourcing of cyber functions. You see the arrows, all the arrows are going up. We are seeing increasing trend in the state CISOs leveraging those private sector and partnership. So that's a positive trend. If we are talking about a 10-year journey, and if my kids are behind the car asking, well, are we there yet? It looks like we have a long way to go still, but positive progress. Back to you, Meredith.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and Srini, I will say, we talk here about leading outsourced cyber functions. A lot of outsourcing, or maybe too much outsourcing. I know sometimes CISOs aren't exactly comfortable with that. And a stat that we don't have in here is CISOs are not confident in local government cyber posture, and a lot of them are not confident or don't know the cyber practices of third-party or outsourcing folks who they outsource to. That was really troubling to me. And again, I would issue a challenge to state CISOs to really know what the cybersecurity practices of third-party contractors are. You know, later this year, NASCIO is going to take on a project about cybersecurity and procurement. That's an area where I really think, I know, in fact, that CISOs really need to be involved in, instead of having an idea or a project baked and then throwing it over to the CISO and saying, okay, let's check a cybersecurity box. Really, you know, thinking about that at the very beginning will make things a lot easier on everybody. So Maria or Debbie, whoever wants to go first, either of these 3 bold plays from 2018, did you implement anything because of this? Any comments you want to make on the 3 bold plays?
So I will say on the budget piece of it, over the 5+ years that I've been with the state, I have seen our cybersecurity budget increase, but there's a word that's missing, and I think that needs to be added, and it's recurring budget. And the reason why I say that is because we will get one-time pots of money, and that's it. And so you can implement a program or a project, and then the next, fiscal year, you're scrambling to figure out, how can I carry on? How can I continue this program? And it is a struggle. Right now, we're dealing with that right now, especially with the pandemic, where we have budget constraints, and we're looking and we're having these discussions internally to say, okay, what is it that we have to have in place? Now I have to choose, which I really hate to do, because the reason why I've implemented a project is because I thought it was critical in the first place. So it's like choosing between one bad and a worse. You know, what do I do in a situation like that? So it's having that recurring budget, I think, is that term that is a key term that we need to be tracking over time, because I think that will give us a better picture of where our true spends are over a longer period of time.
Yeah, and from my perspective, so I felt like the Deloitte NASCIO survey in 2018 gave me permission to look into outsourcing a little bit. So I have certainly looked into how can we outsource some of our monitoring, and particularly around endpoint detection and response, to augment our staff, because we're not watching 24/7, 365 days a year the way that we should. But I can have a managed security service that does that for me. So, so thank you for the 2018 recommendation. That was helpful to me to really start exploring that without feeling a lot of guilt about it.
And if I could add, that is a very key point. I think that, going back to the fact that we are under-resourced, we as CISOs need to be realistic on what we can consume within our organization, and look for those opportunities where we can put the heavy lifting on our vendor partners to assist us, understanding that we still need to maintain some level of oversight, but again, having that shared responsibility, not shared risk, but shared responsibility between us.
Sure.
I agree.
And Debbie, we're happy to be cover for you all. That's one of our goals in this study, because we can say something, all 50 states might have different things. I know you all have different things going on. So we do hope that CISOs and CIOs use this study to talk to their legislatures, to talk to governors and things like that. That is one of the big purposes. So Steve, if we can go to the next slide. All right, and then one more. So in our last kind of 10 or 15 minutes here, we talked about obviously the big themes, revisited the bold plays from 2018. Now we want to go a little bit into some of the other data. As Srini said, there were, I believe, 61 questions, and a lot of them were multi-part in the survey. So there's a lot of data in the report, and it's available on NASCIO's website right now if you want to dig into that. It also makes a really great Christmas present. We'll be happy to mail you a copy if you're interested in that. So a little bit about identity and access management. I want to bring in, for folks who saw the CIO survey session yesterday, one of the things that CIOs thought would change post-COVID is this concept of identity management. And that's both internal, as more states have people working from home, it's making sure that the right people are getting onto the state systems. It's also external. A lot of states were doing citizen services online, a lot more pivoted because of COVID, and still some more had a lot of issues with that because of legacy systems and others. And I will make one last point before I turn this over to Srini. During the pandemic, I was watching a press conference. I'm here in Kentucky, watching a press conference from my governor, and he said the word legacy system, and I thought that I was going to cry tears of joy. So again, if anything good can come out of the pandemic, I hope, I'm a very positive person, I hope that our leaders, our governors, and our legislature really kind of understand some of the things that CIOs and CISOs are going through on a daily basis, and hopefully we can get the funding and get the attention that I think this really deserves. But Srini, take us into identity and access management.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. Talking of tears of joy, when one of the state governors actually talked about two-factor authentication and when that is in the roadmap, that was my moment several years back too. So talking about identity and access management, several key data points came in this area. The predominant one is just how much has it jumped in the priority in the eyes of the CISOs. So it is next to risk assessment. It has moved up into the enterprise priority as a number 2, and potentially because of some of the things that Meredith and the CIOs talked about. We talked a little bit about how the workforce may never go completely back into the state offices. Now think about the citizens accessing digital services. There was a huge surge in demand of citizen services, and for the past 6+ months, they are not visiting any of the state offices. And they are absolutely going to question what is the need for them to ever visit a state office ever again. And so the digital services need to continue to increase, and identity and access management is a very fabric of how to make it happen more efficiently and effectively. And when we looked at the top barriers to adopt enterprise identity management, the legacy systems come back into question again, right? In the complexity of integrating these commercial off-the-shelf tools and processes into with the legacy systems, and the competing with high priority initiatives and decentralized environment in states that makes it more difficult for multiple programs to use the same identity and access management model. Back to you, Meredith, for maybe some comments from the CISOs.
Well, I think we're winding down here, so let's roll through these last. I think we have 2 or 3 slides just on the deep dive. So, Steve, next slide, if you would.
So, certainly. Now, this one is even more interesting in terms of the cyber threats. So, this one, the first one, financial fraud. 30 state CISOs put financial fraud as a leading cause of breaches or potential issues in the state, compared to 10 states in 2018. Now, just think about that for a second. The unemployment compensation, large amount of money is being dispersed, is potentially causing these financial fraud to occur. And cyber could be a tool in mitigating those kind of losses that are taking place, and could be a huge avenue to get closer to the business. So we have seen this in other industries like financial services. When the cyber becomes part to the core of the business, then the funding and other challenges disappear, and that could be a potential area. And of course, the leading causes of breach continue to be malicious code, web applications, and hacktivism. If you can go to the next slide, please. And budget, we talked about it quite a bit. The one that I want to point out is the last part of the slide to the right, that talk about chargeback mechanisms versus appropriations. So most of the states are still in a hybrid of chargeback from agencies. And Maria, you talked about chargeback from local governments, and that being the predominant source for cyber funding. And the federal funding models that we talked about, if that were to come true, and if there is a recurring funding for multiple years, that could really help the funding situation. And Steve, if you can go to the next slide, please. And that's probably the last slide. So maybe we can go back to the budget slide, and back to you, Meredith.
Kind of closing comments on any of these deep dives or overall thoughts. We can let the slide sit here for a sec, and then Steve, give it a few seconds, and then we can move on to the last one. But Maria, I'll go to you first. You are a longtime serving CISO, a veteran CISO, and closing thoughts on the study, on this year in cyber, anything you want to talk about.
Well, I'll just say this. I never thought I would be considered a veteran CISO. I remember when I first joined the state, it was like, I remember the ladies that were before me that were CISOs in the other states, and now I'm a veteran. Say yes. Love this report. I think that it puts a spotlight on those key things and struggles and issues and opportunities that we can have across all of the states. And I hope that it continues, because it, to what Debbie mentioned earlier, it helps us to paint a picture when we talk to our legislators and when we talk to our, our governor and the other leaders within the state. So I, again, love the information, and I hope it keeps continuing down the chart that it's going into. And I do hope that actually, one of the things, let me take a step back. One of the things that, if there are local government folks that are on this call right now, that I want you to understand is that most of the states are adopting this whole of state approach to cybersecurity. And you really should understand that it is not a big brother type situation here. You are not alone. The key thing that you need to realize, you are not alone. And the state may look to you for advice, because I know that there are subject matter experts down there in the local government that we can tap into. We should all look at each other as resources to help fight the cyber battle. So that's the one takeaway that I'd like for the local folks that may be on this call to take back with them.
Yeah, completely agree. Like Maria said, I love this study. I use it as part of my business case when I take any funding request to the legislature, and I say, here's what other states are doing, here's what other states have prioritized, here's how we compare. There is nothing like this that exists that I'm aware of in the private sector, because certainly when I was in the private sector before, and I would take a request to my leadership for funding, and they would say, well, what are our competitors doing? And I really had a hard time figuring figuring out, how to go get that data. So I appreciate what you're doing. Nothing in the report was a surprise to me. And I am just thrilled that we got so much participation this year.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. Srini, closing comments.
Well, Maria, Meredith, and Debbie, thank you for being on the panel. I'm really honored to be part of the journey since 2010, along with you and the other state chief information security officers. Really gratifying to see that the progress is being made. While there are challenges, your positive attitude to figure out how to go and resolve those challenges and make progress, I think that gives a lot of satisfaction in terms of the effort that we put into producing this study. So thank you very much. And Meredith, back to you.
Thanks, Srini. And there's a lot of data that we presented to y'all today. So download the report. This is the website. And then we didn't really have time for questions today, but Srini and I are both on Twitter. You can see our Twitter handles. I talk about cybersecurity and post a lot of pictures of my dog in case you're interested in either one of those. Use the hashtag #StateOfCyber to do that. And then, again, just my thanks to Maria, to Debbie, Srini, whether you like it or not, we are now partners in crime. So, sorry for that. And so many folks worked on this study. I want to quickly say thank you to Annette and Barney at Deloitte, and also Team NASCIO, who worked a lot on this. So, Mr. President, we will turn it back to you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, folks, for such a tremendous panel discussion. That was just amazing. And each year, I think we continue to get better at these discussions. I want to thank Deloitte for their continued collaboration in the production of this really high quality and important work product. Srini, you wouldn't know from my stumbled introduction that I've known you for almost 6 years, but in all seriousness, your analysis and communication of the data is always spot on, and I use statements that you make all the time in my legislative testimony and my justification for policies and budget work. So thank you, Srini. I so appreciate it. I know the other CIOs and CISOs do as well. Meredith, NASCIO has a tremendously strong CISO community, and I think it's a lot of that's due to you being the glue for that community. You bring us together, you make it happen for us, and I think I'll share the quote you shared with me this morning. CISOs rule, CIOs drool. So you know that there's real pride in that community, and I think it's well justified. Maria and Debbie, it's clear that you are really dedicated to keeping your citizens safe, your citizens' data safe, and the citizen services running in your states. But also, I want to thank you for your dedication to cyber on a national level and the things you can contribute beyond your states. I know you guys work really hard, and NASCIO and the rest of the CIOs and CISOs appreciate your efforts. If you'd like to discuss the session or ask related questions to your colleagues, head over to the Hub and use the chat function on this agenda item. The deep dives related to today's theme are now live on demand in the Hub. These sessions are dedicated federal cyber funding, sponsored by Egress. Pressing privacy issues, sponsored by SAP Public Services. State and local cyber collaboration, sponsored by CrowdStrike. Securing work from home, sponsored by FireEye. Don't forget to visit the Hub for games, social media contests, and ways to engage with your fellow colleagues. I ask you all to continue to participate, and please enjoy the rest of your day.